Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Happy doing. All right, I quit. That's the end of the show. Screw this. All right, happy Friday. It's not Good Friday yet, so we say medium Friday morning to you. Good Friday. Next Friday, we get the chance once annually to do that and say, haha, what a funny joke. It is Friday, April 11th, 2025. Time for another show. Many things have happened. Once again, this sort of news cycle continues to go on. It is, of course, Friday, which means Donald Trump makes a dash for the helicopter and a flight to Florida to play golf all weekend and turns the world upside down on the flights there and back on Sunday with crazy, unhinged, and unvetted utterings to the press. So we'll have an eye out for what we need to update you on Monday. That'll all happen Friday, most of which we'll forget about by the time he comes back on Sunday and says we're invading whoever. By the way, I don't know if you've been watching the morning posts that we put up just to alert people in case there are people who don't know and somebody wanders around Daily Coast and says, oh, there's actually a live streaming radio program I can listen to. Okay, fine. I will. I don't know how many people we bring in this way, but actually, that's something you can all tell me about. How did you find this place? And how can I make 10,000 more of you find the place? I guess, if that's at all possible. I'm just curious, and I don't know, maybe we're wasting our time posting this thing each morning. I have a feeling, though, it must bring in somebody, and I don't want anybody out there wandering around lost, thinking that there's no place for me to go to live stream commentary on the news each Monday through Friday morning and miss out. Anyway, but I've been posting as a regular feature, first of all, counting down all sorts of days until, which is a little bit depressing, but it's kind of one of those put one foot in front of the other thing and keep on going. Counting down the number of days, for instance, until, I don't know, the end of this next term of office, if that's still a thing for Donald Trump, which, by the way, we are at 1,380. Is that right? That's a nice even round number. So, under 1,400, is that good? 173 days left on the current fiscal year, which is in control of a lot more than just federal spending. But I have always been, of the last couple of years, counting down the number of days to the next government shutdown, because we've always got one looming. And even though they actually finished up and did a CR for the rest of the fiscal year, the rest of the fiscal year isn't that long. 173 days there, 571 days until the midterm elections, if we have them, 632 days until, if we do have those elections, that new Congress is seated. And then I added the feature of the Invasion Bingo, a random country generator that I found online. And I just figure I spin the wheel each day, come up with a random country, and I say, if that day Donald Trump threatens to invade that country, something. Originally, the offering was I would get you a seat on Trump's cabinet. But I don't think I can deliver that anymore. First of all, most of those positions are filled, although there are a couple that are not. We still have a large number of acting, not secretaries, but maybe independent agency heads. And still 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 agencies out there that are headed by people who actually have a job elsewhere, but are doubling and even tripling up on some of those. I've got a story stuck in pocket about that one. Anyway, the idea was to just pick a country at random and realize that there was some significant danger, no matter what country it was, that we might threaten to invade it or otherwise violate its sovereignty at some point during the day. And I've been waiting for the big ones to hit. Will Canada come up? Because we're definitely going to, on the day we pick Canada, there was a pretty good chance over the last couple of months that, that counts as a threat to invade Canada. Today is Denmark, just at random. And with all the things going on in Greenland, which is, I don't know what, an autonomous territory owned by, I don't think they would choose the word owned by, but administered by Denmark, or considered an administrative territory of Denmark. Would we technically be invading Denmark if we invaded Greenland? I guess so. They'd certainly feel that way in Denmark. I don't know how they'd feel about it in Greenland. But anyway, that we're on alert for that one. That could actually hit today. Although I do note that the rhetoric on Greenland has shifted of late, like the last 2 or 3 days. Which it might not be a lasting thing, but I think I saw that the administration at some point put out word that they were moving to the persuasion model and away from anything that smacked of military threat. Well, we will talk the Greenlandic population. Is Greenland? If I say it a lot faster, it'll sound a lot better. Greenlandic. But if you really slow it down like that, you can see why they would object to being called that. Greenlandic. But anyway, Greenlandic opinion. The idea being they're going to sway them into wanting to be part of the United States. So much so that something, they vote, I don't know, and vote to kick out Denmark and join the fabulous United States of America. And I think, I didn't put this aside, but somewhere they said, well, you should consider the I don't know what, the ethnic type and cultural connections with the Inuit native peoples across Canada and all the way into Alaska that many of you share, and somebody commenting, yeah, that's the selling point. Sell them on how the United States has treated the indigenous population. That's going to do it. Well, I don't know that it's going to change any minds, but I don't know any minds were ready to be changed. Anyway, I just thought that was of interest. And by the way, somewhere along the line, too, now I got to make notes to myself about what to go retrieve. But the news out of Greenland, it was an Air Force base. Now it's a Space Force base. And the commander, the colonel in charge of this base, has been dismissed from duty for having sent around an email. I should have grabbed the story, but I'll find it for you for the links, and I'll have to find them fast because Scott's busy today. But sent around an email after Vance's visit, just sort of reassuring everyone on base and everyone in the base community that, hey, the people here in charge of running this place day to day aren't violent weirdos who want to thrash you and violate your sovereignty. We're going to be working together side by side, all of our flags flying together in harmony. Oh, well, that's crazy. You're fired. You're out. So she's been replaced because you didn't, talk about how we were going to kick the crap out of Greenland and take it over because we wanted to, and we're rough and tough. So those are the stories I don't intend to cover for today, but I guess I'll find them and just prove to you that they exist, because that's what we do for the weekend. Charge you up, get you ready to talk to people that you run into over the weekend, and share stories or refute the stupid ones that other people might bring up. There's a lot happening in the courts. I think we've spent too much time in and around the courts, but of course they're very important, and it's the tip of the spear, and it's like the only branch of government where we really have any hope of seeing the rule of law and objectivity continue to work, but only to a limited extent. I think we gave you fair warning the other day when the word came out that Chief Justice Roberts had delivered a temporary administrative stay on the rulings from the federal court in Maryland, which had then been affirmed by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, I think en banc as well, but basically upheld the federal district court's rulings about Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, and that he absolutely had to be returned to the United States, regardless of the arguments made and presented by the government that, well, gee whiz, he's out of our hands now, and even a habeas corpus petition won't work because El Salvador doesn't care about whether there's a U.S. federal court habeas order or not, and he's out of our hands, and there's nothing we can do to get him back, which was absurd on its face. And at a minimum, you should be able to argue, hey, what happened to President Great Deals here? He made a deal that we pay El Salvador, and then we can't actually get them to do things that we ask him to do. But we never got to that point because Trump was never going to ask the president of El Salvador to return this guy. Anyway, when Chief Justice Roberts issued his administrative stay, everybody kind of flipped out. And, I guess it's reasonable to flip out. You're worried about what this court is going to do, what Roberts is really like. How can you deny the power of the district court's ruling and the affirmation of the Fourth Circuit, given how basic the issues are? But we were warned by Supreme Court watchers, a few of them anyway. Listen, these administrative stays, this is kind of routine. Yes, it comes from Roberts. And it might just worry you even more if it had come from Thomas, but it's sort of a routine thing. You get a case like that the Supreme Court is going to consider on an emergency basis. Very frequently, the circuit justices will say, well, let me put a stay on things, so we're going to get to this like in a day or two or three. So don't worry too much about it. And we did get that warning, and it is a routine thing. And sure enough, it wasn't handled immediately. It did take a day or two, but I don't know. Time passes so fast in the news cycle, so crazy. I can't even remember what it was. 1, 2, 3 days. But at any rate, the Supreme Court ruled, and there was less cause for concern about that administrative stay because it was a 9-0 ruling. However, it's time to parse that ruling. In part, it at least says, well, yeah, you can't just grab people off the street, decide to give them no due process whatsoever, admit you made a mistake along the way, imprison the guy overseas, wash your hands of him because he's overseas, and then say, there's no mechanism by which the federal government can re-examine or examine for the first time this case of whether this person should have been apprehended at all, much less deported, if that's even the word for it. Extraordinary rendition is a lot closer to the proper term. Well, anyway, the court agrees that that's crazy. However, we do find ourselves, I guess, long story short on this one, the immediate reaction from certain corners of the administration, which I think will come down as official administration position, is, yeah, I hear you, but what are you going to do? That's it. It's going to come down to, can you make me do anything? And the court, I think they got their 9-0 votes together, even from the wackadoodles, because the ruling was relatively narrow. But the important part of it was that even the people who said, yeah, well, that's true. He's in El Salvador and El Salvador doesn't care about our habeas orders. Even though just the other day, even the conservatives in the court said, well, habeas is the only remedy available to these guys. And, acknowledging also the country that they're being held in, they don't care. And you can, not only is habeas the only remedy, but habeas has to be filed in the district where you're being held. But if you're being held in El Salvador, there isn't a district for you. So, that was a little confusing too. But they basically, what they really said in the end, and I guess some of these analyses will make it a little bit clearer, is that the district court was correct in saying that it can essentially rule in equity, which I guess if you've gone through law school, back in the back of your mind, there's sort of the fail-safe of equity, which is not statutory law, but, grows out of common law, but sort of a different branch of law where it's like, I know all the rules say that this is against the rules, but this is so unfair that the rules just suck and can't be counted on to work in the interests of justice, generally speaking. Oh, I didn't realize we had that. Well, from time to time that comes through. We'll let the analysts explain it, but there's an awful lot and a lot that's tied up in it. And so let me see. I put aside what's the I gotta take a look at some of these things came through via, here we go. The first thing I saw came through via social media. It's on Blue Sky. Michael C. Dorf Dorf, you might remember Dorf on golf. That was what, Tim Conway? This is Michael C. Dorf on law. I know, he's seen the series. It's funny. A Cornell constitutional law professor, he says. And I believe him. I, for one, believe him. So his quick analysis of what was happening last night, he says, I'm seeing a lot of criticism of the SCOTUS order in the Abrego Garcia case. Even though it was 9-0, you'll see why. Why, people ask, does the court suggest that the district court may have exceeded its authority? I don't like the prospect of further delay, but I think the court's order gets it about right. Let me explain. He does it quicker than Steve Vladeck, who will do it next. First, he says, there doesn't need to be further delay. Judge Zinnis, remember Xinis, Zinnis from Maryland, the original trial court judge. It wasn't a trial, but the district court judge. Judge Zinnis could clarify her order in hours or even minutes, right? It was sent back for her to clarify. And maybe I'm reading them out of order just in terms of who should be first, but this is the quick and dirty version. And if you need the details about, well, what does all this mean? We'll head over to Steve Vladeck. Second, SCOTUS is correct to suggest that a federal judge cannot order the executive to effectuate, that's the word they use, effectuate the return of a U.S. citizen from a foreign sovereign if effectuate means guarantee. Essentially what the court here said was, you got to make a good faith effort to try to get him back, and you're talking about the Trump administration, so that's why everybody's sweating it. Good faith effort from these guys. What are you going to order them to do this or not? And one of the problems addressed by the court is, well, we could order it, and if they say, well, we're not gonna, what are we doing then? Well, that's an existential question for you. And they don't like those. So they said, we'll take this first step. But first, the judge should clarify that the ruling that she made is saying XYZ, which will make us feel better about the nature of her order. Generally speaking, she's ordered the right thing. We wanted her to say it this way rather than that way, and she can and will do that. Various Trump administration officials have said correctly that the writ of habeas corpus does not run to El Salvador, but they have then said incorrectly that a federal district judge therefore can't do anything. Well, that's not right. The unavailability of habeas doesn't mean there's no remedy. SCOTUS implicitly but unmistakably and correctly approved the exercise of equitable jurisdiction here. Thus, Judge Zinnis has the traditional powers of equity. These include ordering parties to make good faith efforts toward an end. Courts routinely order good faith efforts in other contexts. In this context, Judge Zinnis can, and in my view, should, order the government to make good faith efforts to obtain Abrego Garcia's return, backed by a requirement that if Abrego Garcia is not swiftly returned, the administration detail why. Although the SCOTUS order says Judge Zinnis could give due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs, it necessarily and unanimously rejects the administration's argument that such deference precludes any form of judicial equitable relief. That's important. Further, the order states that the government should be prepared to share what it can concerning the steps that it has taken and the prospect of further steps. The what it can phrasing is weaker than I would have liked, but at least it implies the administration can't simply invoke national security as a talisman. The key now, in my view, is to leverage President Trump's claims, and this is a great point, so glad we're having it up front. Leverage President Trump's claims that he follows court orders, dubious in some of the funding cases, but heretofore true in SCOTUS cases. And remember also, even Chuck Schumer said, well, call me if he defies the Supreme Court, right? I know, then what? But anyway, this, along with another factor, Trump hates to look weak. If DOJ lawyers come back to court and say, well, we asked, but Bukele said no, the Trump administration will look weak. A foreign leader, whom the U.S. is paying millions of dollars to detain migrants for the U.S., told us to bugger off, is not credible and is a sign of weakness. Given the near certainty that Bukele would return Abrego Garcia to the U.S. if the Trump administration asked in good faith, the administration's desire to look strong, strongly strong, could thus be leveraged here. A public campaign equating a failure to secure the return as weakness should start now. I think that's an excellent point. Now, as we go into somewhat more detail that will help explain some of the connective tissue and all this, one other explanation I'll give you is, I think if I remember my history of law correctly, if you're confused about this equity thing, it's not familiar to most people. I know what the idea of, well, it's not fair or it doesn't serve the interests of justice. Well, we have black letter law in this country. Yes, we do. Statutory law, but also we have the common law tradition. We inherited our legal system from England, from whom we declared independence. Yes, but we admired their legal system for whatever reason. And way back when, there was a separate court system. I mean, we're talking about, way back medieval England, late medieval England, up into, 15th, 16th, 17th century England. Their court system is different and weird. It's not weird to them, I'm sure. But there were also, I guess the courts of equity idea comes from, as I recall, they had sort of chancery courts. And some states still have chancery court, or what they call chancery court in this country. It's not exactly the same, but there was basically an ecclesiastical court on top of or alongside the legal courts in England, and they dealt with these cases of equity, fairness, justice, God's justice on earth. And we didn't establish the same thing because we weren't into an establishment of state religion, but the prospect of being without recourse to moral justice was, less than satisfactory for the framers. And so I don't even know whether they did anything formal about it, but the upshot of it is, and I'm not a legal historian, but the upshot of it is that we carried this ecclesiastical court thing over as equity and chancery, that there's this opportunity to right wrongs that the black letter law won't countenance, but feel wrong, and the interests of justice demand there be some attention paid to. That's all. That's sort of the weak version of the connective tissue here. Historians will know it better. Scholars of legal history, the best, but I'm not one, so I can't provide it to you. Let me give you Steve Vladek's take on the case from yesterday, because I don't know. Again, this is important. And you don't have to have a granular detail understanding of it, but it's a big case, and we'll spend the first segment on it. Abrego Garcia and the presumption of regularity, which brings us to another super hot issue for the courts that we can at least nod towards, as he does here. How one reads Thursday's ruling ordering the federal government to, quote, facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. Not effectuate, but facilitate. This return depends on how much or how little one expects this administration to turn square corners. Okay. I wanted to put out an extra issue this morning, Steve says, not so much to summarize what the Supreme Court held last night in the Abrego Garcia case. That's what media outlets are for. But to reflect on why there's a fair amount of confusion over exactly what it means, and as such, a wide range of reactions to the ruling. And that's why we're reading this. You will read in the newspaper today what happened, and a few quotes from either side about what they think it means. But you'll know better, having heard from Steve Vladek and Michael Dorf. I'm just the conduit here. I'm picking them, but, Anyway, part of the problem is the ruling itself, which, as I noted in CNN's coverage of it, is maddeningly vague. So you could be wondering what the hell's going on. That's why you're here instead. But the post that follows suggests that the deeper problem is that many, if not most of us, just don't trust the Trump administration to behave on remand, as this is remand, sending it back to the district court for further ruling. Which necessarily colors our view of the significance and scope of the wiggle room that last night's ruling creates, even as it unanimously rejected the broadest and most alarming claim put forth by the government, To tie this to a legal concept, the problem here is the presumption of regularity and how little the current Justice Department ought to be entitled to it. This is a big concept. Let's start with the ruling itself. Recall that Judge Zinis had ordered the government to return Abrego Garcia to the United States by 11:59 p.m. this Monday, April 7th. That the Fourth Circuit had denied the government's application to freeze that order, and that Chief Justice Roberts had entered an administrative stay Monday afternoon, that's how many days, temporarily pausing that deadline while the full court considered the Trump administration's request to suspend it indefinitely. Against that backdrop, here's the key passage of the ruling handed down from the court just before 7 p.m. Thursday. The emphases, I will let you know when he's emphasizing something, I guess, are Steve's. And here's the excerpt. Due to the administrative stay issued by the Chief Justice, the deadline imposed by the district court has now passed. To that extent, the government's emergency application is effectively granted in part, and the deadline in a challenged order is no longer effective. The rest of the district court's order remains in effect. Here, emphasis. Remains in effect, but requires clarification on remand. The order properly requires the government to, quote, facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been handled had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. I got to get ready for our break here. All right, and now we are ready. So there you go. I like that part, right? Requires the government to facilitate his return and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. The intended scope of the term effectuate in the district court's order, however, is unclear and may exceed the district court's authority. The district court should clarify its directive with due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. What's that mean? We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were in the middle of Steve Vladek's discussion of yesterday's decision from the Supreme Court in the Abrego Garcia case, and in quoting the court's ruling here, the part where they hand it back to the district court and ask for a clarification. The issue was, I think, over the use of the word effectuate versus their preferred term facilitate. They were worried that the district court may have exceeded its authority in using the word effectuate and ordering the Trump administration to effectuate Abrego Garcia's return. Sounded like the court was ordering the executive branch, that the judicial branch was ordering the separated powers and the co-equal branch of the executive to perform some duty, although that does happen from time to time in writs of mandamus, etc. But in this case, they were saying, basically, better that you say, make a good faith effort to do this. I want you to say you order the administration to facilitate his return. Do what you can to make it more possible. Should the Salvadorans refuse to cooperate or some other issue arise, then you're not on the hook in the same way that I ordered you to effectuate it. And the fact that they disagreed means you now need to, invade and snatch him away? I don't know. They were a little worried about that. But that brings up basically the overall issue of how much deference the executive branches do, in this case, in the conduct of foreign affairs. And usually a lot, everything. Like basically everybody has to jump out of the way of the executive branch when it comes to foreign affairs. It's sort of their exclusive domain. But, or at least in the practice of diplomacy anyway, yeah, there's some fiscal oversight over foreign operations and foreign policy. Anyway, the point is, this is about the amount of deference that the judiciary owes the executive branch in general, and in particular in the conduct of foreign affairs. And that's a hot topic lately because the deference that they get is a doctrine that grows out of 200 plus years of more or less uninterrupted ability to trust that the government is usually arriving in court and operating in good faith with the judges, not lying to them, not faking evidence, not covering up. There have been some rough spots over the years there, but that generally speaking, the lawyers that show up are hesitant to lie, obviously and knowingly for the government. They do produce evidence when they're ordered to, and if it just doesn't exist, they have to admit as much, all sorts of things. That's the presumption of regularity that others were, or I guess Vladek was talking about, and Dorf must have mentioned, I'm pretty sure that he did, but the presumption that these guys are going to conduct themselves as normal people, regular lawyers, not lie their asses off like crazy in court, knowing that they could be easily caught, and, whoa, who cares? What are they going to do about it? The presumption that that's not the attitude with which they pursue litigation. But increasingly, it's become difficult to continue to honor that tradition, let's say. And Vladek links to another piece in Lawfare, which discusses the breakdown in that presumption later on. Anyway, back to Vladek and his quote from the court's decision. The district court should clarify its directive with due regard, whatever that may be, for the deference owed the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. For its part, the government should be prepared to share what it can, anyway, concerning the steps it has taken and the prospect of further steps. So, one, you can't really order them to actually effectuate it, but in exchange, the government also, since we owe it deference, it owes us candor, what it's really doing and what it can still try, so that we know where we stand. Will they do that? I don't know. I don't think so. In other words, the government remains under the obligation that Judge Zinnes initially imposed to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, but not necessarily to effectuate it. Of note, Judge Zinnes has already scheduled a hearing for this afternoon on what should happen next, so not too much delay here. As Justice Sotomayor's separate statement, joined in full by Justices Kagan and Jackson, notes, it's not a dissent, but interestingly, it's not just a concurrence, even though 9-0, so she clearly concurs with the ruling, but this is a separate statement, as it's labeled here, which is interesting. This order, she says, necessarily, this isn't a quote, but a summary. We'll tell you when it gets to the quote. So Justice Sotomayor's separate statement, joined in full by Kagan and Jackson, notes, this order necessarily rejects the government's principal argument. Okay, so they got housed on that one. That argument was that the United States courts cannot grant relief once a deportee crosses the border. That's a little harsh, don't you think? Again, that just sets up the ability of the United States government to just snatch people up off the streets, citizens or not, and ship them to some gulag somewhere and say, well, nothing you can do about due process now. Well, that sucks. Just as Monday's ruling in JGG, the other case pending over the deportations and renditions to El Salvador, just as Monday's ruling in JGG rejected the government's argument that individuals subject to the Alien Enemy Act are not entitled to notice and an opportunity to be heard before being removed, That was rejected. The court has once again unanimously repudiated the extreme claims being advanced by the Trump administration. And that is unquestionably both correct, one, correct, and two, good. And I put that in the context, by the way, of yesterday's wackadoodle cabinet meeting at which, you know how Trump does his cabinet meetings. Everybody has to come and kiss his ass for a while and tell him how awesome he is, and then give me a report on something strongly strong. And Pam Bondi was among the worst. But I was just thinking, what didn't she just sit there and say, the courts are ruling in your favor on everything, sir. You're a genius. But she was actually talking about, I think, most of the spending cases and the dodgy firing cases, as opposed to these immigration cases. But she may have just been lying about that as well. I mean, anyway, let me continue with Vladek's analysis here. But Abrego Garcia is, for all we know, still being held at the CICOT prison in El Salvador. And so the question now turns to what arguments the government might be able to make that would require Judge Zinnes to show the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. For instance, what if the government, in response to questions about the arrangement between the United States and President Bukele, and we have several questions. Has anybody seen it? Is it written? What is it? I've been wondering for the longest time, like, what happened to President Great Deals here? Like, where's the deal? We're paying them how much and how often? And if we want somebody back that we're paying them to hold, why can't we get them back? I mean, I know that they were saying, oh, well, we have no jurisdiction there, but we should have contract rights there. Unless we have no contract. President Great Deals. What about that? All right. Well, anyway, what if the government, in response to questions about the arrangement between the United States and Bukele, invokes the state secrets privilege? I won't show you. You can't find out what the deal is. As it did before Chief Judge Boasberg in the JGG litigation. We're not going to tell you. What if they invoke the state secrets privilege to prevent Judge Zinnes from answering them, even with respect to information that has already been publicly tweeted by Secretary Rubio? Like, okay, we can't even get to the bottom of whether or not they're making good faith efforts with respect to the agreement because they won't tell us anything about the agreement. Well, that's tough. So again, just to set that up, because I, kept interjecting. What if, in response to questions about the arrangement, the government invokes state secrets privilege and prevents Judge Zinnes from getting answers to those questions? What if the government instead files declarations from Trump appointees swearing that there are no steps that they can take at this point to secure Abrego Garcia's release, whether or not that is actually true? And that's one of their favorite things, right? They usually find places in the law that say, well, if the president swears that this is true, or the president and the Secretary of State swear that there is a national emergency, we won't look any further into it. It's up to them to make that determination. And they realize that, and the Trump administration very frequently says they can't probe any further, so let's just swear it. Up until this point, it's generally been presumed that administrations are mostly, trepidatious, is that right, about doing something that they've got some concerns. I don't know. We shouldn't just flatly assert that it's true, knowing that we can avoid all inquiry. We should really be relatively sure that it would stand up, and we have some way of answering questions rather than just standing there and saying, I'm not going to answer. I'm just going to lean on this authority to declare it to be so. But this administration is happy to do so. So what if the government says, we're required to tell you what steps, at a minimum, there are left to take? And the answer is there's none. Who says? Says me. Well, I mean, what do you mean there's nothing you can ask? Look, I'm telling you there's not. Would you give deference to that assertion? In any other administration, we could have at least some confidence that the government would tell the truth when put to its paces. Indeed, in my initial post on this case, I noted how, when the Office of the Solicitor General discovered that it had not been entirely accurate in an earlier case about the process by which the government returns individuals to the United States when they've been wrongfully removed, because we have had that process in the past, it was transparent about the misstatement and took affirmative steps to remedy it. Even then, even this administration was doing that. The governments aren't perfect, but we, and especially courts, labor under the assumption that they are acting in good faith. But what if they are not? My friend and University of Minnesota law professor Alan Rosenstein, perhaps, with an H in there, S-H, Rosenstein, I don't know whether he pronounces the H in there or not, wrote about this exact concern in a Lawfare post yesterday titled, "What Happens When Courts Can't Trust the Executive Branch?" In other words, that judicial canon, that doctrine of deference to the executive in almost every area, but in particular in this case, in the conduct of foreign affairs, but in a lot of things. What happens when you can't trust the executive branch, where they're repeatedly lying to you, but you are instructed by judicial doctrine to defer to them anyway? Do you continue to do it because the doctrine says do it, or do you stop doing it because the underlying reasoning for the doctrine is now absent? That's a big question, and is addressed in a separate writing. But we might want to read that, or I'll at least refer you to it. The link is in here anyway. The problem in these cases has everything to do with what courts call the presumption of regularity, i.e., the assumption that all things being equal, the government officers act lawfully and government lawyers act truthfully. Oh well, so much for that. As Rosenstein writes, the presumption serves the institutional needs of both the courts and the executive branch. Maybe I can skip reading you the whole article by giving you this key excerpt. It prevents courts from constantly becoming entangled in searching inquiries into the internal deliberations and motivations behind every government action. Such inquiries would overburden the courts, undermine the separation of powers, paralyze the executive branch, and chill necessary lawful government action. While the presumption has never perfectly reflected reality, there have, after all, been plenty of government scandals in American history. It has struck a reasonable balance between judicial oversight and the need to give the government appropriate leeway in carrying out its functions. Yeah, there have been several abuses of it, including abuses of the state secrets doctrine. True, we're aware of that. But as they say, generally speaking, on balance, because they usually are, in fact, operating in good faith and even willing to admit their mistakes when necessary, this continues on. The presumption, we're still with Rosenstein here, the presumption also directly protects the judiciary. By presuming regularity, courts can often avoid direct, politically charged confrontations with the executive branch that might, as the least dangerous branch, ultimately lose. It's an example of what the legal scholar Alexander Bickel called the passive virtues, the court's use of doctrines of restraint, such as deference, to preserve their institutional capital. I think it's a little weedy there, but you get the idea. Back to Vladek, it would thus make all the sense in the world during any other administration to read the court's order in Abrego Garcia as a rebuke to the government, one that would quickly lead to Abrego Garcia's return once the district court properly tailored its inquiry on remand. But the Trump administration is entitled to no such deference, not just in general, but thanks to its behavior in this very case, where, among other things, it has suspended career DOJ lawyers because one of them had the temerity to be candid, which is a duty he owes to Judge Zenas, and where the White House press secretary responded to Judge Zenas' initial ruling by suggesting that the judge contact President Bukele because we are unaware of the judge having jurisdiction or authority over the country of El Salvador. Indeed, here is the official statement of the Department of Justice put out last night in reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling, which it has claimed is another victory for Trump, the 0-9 victory. As the Supreme Court correctly recognized, it is the exclusive prerogative of the president to conduct foreign affairs. By directly noting the deference owed to the executive branch, this ruling once again illustrates that activist judges do not have the jurisdiction to seize control of the president's authority to conduct foreign policy. That's a comment on a 9-0 ruling. We thus come back to the exact same problem with last night's ruling that I had with Monday's ruling in the Alien Enemies Act case, that the court may be splitting the difference in a way that avoids a head-on institutional confrontation, but at the cost of, 1, standing up for the lower court judges who are in the trenches in these cases, and 2, meaningful relief for the actual plaintiffs, given the wiggle room the rulings create. Having to file in other courts in JGG, that is, habeas petitions in wherever you're being held all over the country, if you're lucky enough to be held in the country, and having to go back to Judge Zinis in Abrego Garcia. None of this would be an issue with the executive branch that was actually entitled to the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs, and that could be trusted to be candid about what it could and could not do vis-a-vis the Salvadoran government. But it's a glaring issue here, one that, as the Justice Department statement capitalizes upon, last night's ruling does nothing at all to dispel. On Monday, I suggested that the biggest problem with the ruling in the Alien Enemies Act case, which, it should be said, has already reaped positive dividends in district courts in New York and Texas, is that it raises the alarming possibility that the court is not, in fact, ready to accept how profound a threat the Trump administration poses to the rule of law. Not because the court is upholding what the government is doing, but because a majority of justices are willing to let the government win on procedural technicalities in contexts in which the real-world costs are increasingly severe. I fear that last night's ruling in Abrego Garcia is yet another example of the same pattern, and further reason for concern that the Supreme Court thinks it's better off dancing around the Trump administration than standing up to it more forcefully. And here we can remind ourselves of, I forget whose formulation it was, that the metaphor here was, it's like engineers moving the Rubicon River closer and closer to Rome so that Caesar never technically crosses it, right? Yeah. Whatever he does, as long as he doesn't cross the Rubicon. Well, did he just cross the Rubicon? Well, technically, no. He crossed where the Rubicon used to be, but we've moved the Rubicon. Really? Wow. Okay. There were certainly arguments in support of this kind of slow dance, especially where, as is true with respect to both Monday's ruling and last night's, the court has unanimously rejected the government's more extravagant and outlandish claims and underscored the need for meaningful judicial review, even for detainees alleged to be alien enemies, whatever that may mean, and or those held outside the United States. Steve says, I don't mean to understate the importance of those interventions or to downplay the significance of the victories the plaintiffs have achieved by securing them. Indeed, it seems clear beyond peradventure, that we're far better off with these rulings than without them. But such passive-aggressive rulings also come with costs. And as I sit here on Friday morning, I can't help thinking about how much those costs keep mounting. Among other things, they do nothing to rebut or repudiate the attacks on district court judges like Judge Zinis and Chief Judge Boasberg, who continue to be the principal guardrails right now standing between us and full-blown constitutional crisis. And they do nothing to disincentivize the government from continuing to behave this way in future cases, and from disciplining lawyers who don't tote the party line, as opposed to the government's line, the party line, right? All the while, Mr. Abrego Garcia, whose removal to El Salvador was unquestionably unlawful, remains in a Salvadoran prison for who knows how much longer. Justice Sotomayor closed her separate statement accompanying Thursday's ruling by suggesting that in the proceedings on remand, the district court should continue to ensure that the government lives up to its obligations to follow the law. One might say the same thing about the Supreme Court, too. Yeah, and by the way, arguably the Supreme Court are the ones who should feel a lot more confident in ensuring that the government lives up to its obligations to follow the law. To hand this back to a district court judge and say, you take care of taking on the executive branch. We'll stand over here and see how you do is, kind of weak. But honestly, it's the only way you're going to get 9-0 out of that one. And it deserved to be 9-0 on the points of law that were addressed. I know. a little weedy, but you got to understand this stuff and how deep it goes. And how long is this thing in lawfare? Let me just take a look. Oh, well, it looks like a tremendous read. So maybe something you want to take a look at. I guess we'll trust Steve Vladeck gave us the key paragraph out of this thing. But again, this piece, just you should take a look at it. What happens when the courts can't trust the executive branch? In the lower courts, the presumption of regularity is in free fall if it hasn't crashed already. And I mean, I'll tell you this, I mean, it looks to me like there's a great discussion of the origins and necessity of this doctrine of deference to the executive branch. But it's also a great source of I don't know what, 5, 10 bullet pointed instances in which it has become clear that the Trump administration doesn't deserve the deference, that the whole doctrine rests on the idea that these things will not be the norm, and the number of bullet points in which it was the norm are troubling. There's the Alien Enemies Act litigation in front of Judge Boasberg that Vladeck mentioned. There's the fiery opinion in joining the Trump administration's attempt to block transgender people from serving in the military, where Judge Ana Reyes described the ban as soaked in animus and dripping with pretext, not the sort of thing you ordinarily give deference to. Judge Beryl Howell, in another courtroom entirely, during a hearing on Trump's targeting of the Perkins Coie law firm, said that the government's argument sends chills down my spine. In dismissing the indictment against New York City Mayor Eric Adams, Judge Dale Ho sharply criticized the Justice Department's stated reasons for dropping the case. He could see that they were BSing. He found the rationale concerning appearances of impropriety and election interference unsupported by any objective evidence and likely pretextual. There's litigation over the Environmental Protection Agency's termination of $20 billion in climate grants, where Judge Tanya Chutkan, of recent fame, repeatedly pressed the administration for proof supporting its public allegations of criminality and fraud. Finding the government unable to provide evidence weeks into the case, here we are, weeks in, and you're still unable to proffer me any information with regard to any kind of investigation or malfeasance, she said. Chutkan questioned the lawfulness of the termination and temporarily blocked the return of funds. There's more. In litigation challenging the Trump administration's attempt to dismantle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Judge Amy Berman Jackson granted a preliminary injunction finding the administration's arguments lacked credibility. She specifically called out the government's shifting explanation for a stop work order issued to agency staff, stating that its 11th hour attempt to suggest immediately before the hearing that the stop work order was not really a stop work order at all was so disingenuous that the court is left with little confidence that the defense can be trusted to tell the truth about anything. There's more. One more. Judges across the country are growing exasperated with government counsel who are unable to answer basic factual questions or who refuse to confirm whether the government has complied with court orders. One judge described it as suspicious that the government lawyer could not answer the question of who was the first head of the Department of Government Efficiency. Remember that one? Another asked why they were unable to get a straight answer from the government lawyer as to whether their order unfreezing the USAID's funds had been followed. It happens over and over and over again, and you wonder about the foundation of this idea that there needs to be deference to the executive branch in every case. All right. You should read and review that, and I'm sure it looks to have a very interesting scholarly background on that presumption and the foundation of it. Not to mention all of the details about the list of reasons why federal judges have found it to be open to question. Let's see. There's more in and around the legal context. And wow, something I haven't gotten to yet that is aging rapidly that I must get on the record. And I even see that I feel admonished, even though that wasn't the goal of it. Justice mentioning it in his notes behind the scenes here. It really has to get on record. And I I'm sorry it took so long to get here. And the source I grabbed for it was just the first one I saw, and I don't, it's not my favorite go-to here, but from Mediaite, which we've read from in the past, thanks to Alex Griffin for writing the piece. Trump orders DOJ to investigate prominent critic in shocking Oval Office remarks. And then colon and a quote from the Trump. I think he's guilty of treason, which is something he drops more frequently than he should, given the gravity of the treason charge. Another Oval Office signing of more or less meaningless paper. But in this case, again, now using a similar MO, but moving on from the targeting of law firms who represent people he doesn't like or who are fighting against him, is now moving on to individuals he doesn't like who have said things about him or failed to say nice things about him. I don't like what this guy said about me, and I don't like what this guy didn't say about me. That is in the second case, that I won the 2020 election. What the hell's going on here? I'll give you their rundown on it. Okay. President Donald Trump directed the Justice Department to investigate former Homeland Security official Miles Taylor, do you remember him? Over his anonymous essay, and it was once anonymous, now we know it's Miles Taylor, and book hammering Trump during his first term. Trump went so far as to accuse Taylor of committing treason, a capital offense, for writing about what he saw during Trump's first term. Of course, it's all lies. He's making it up. He's making himself very famous. He was seeking attention. But let's also accuse him of a capital crime. Trump also ordered the DOJ to investigate Chris Krebs. You remember Chris Krebs, Trump's election security director during his first term. Trump wildly suggested Krebs was part of an effort to steal the 2020 election, as Krebs repeatedly said there was no evidence of fraud that he could find. He was a Trump appointee, and he was the one who kept saying, the election was the most secure ever. And I mean, shouldn't it be? Republicans have been pressing for security measures for decades. Why aren't they happy to believe that they worked? All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, we were in the middle of the Mediaite recap of the so-called executive orders ordering DOJ to investigate people that Donald Trump didn't like. And it was Miles Taylor who wrote a book about what he saw during the first Trump term. And I mean, we all saw this stuff, but he's going to be investigated for it. And Chris Krebs, his own nominee for election security director, who one, successfully administered the 2020 election, and two, successfully administered Republicans' repeated efforts to make sure that the election was fairly run and retained its integrity. And it did. But rather than be proud of themselves for the effort, I mean, they really shouldn't. It was pretty dumb stuff, and things were pretty fair, and the elections were conducted with integrity before they started meddling. But why they couldn't accept that they had, in fact, administered the most secure election ever. I mean, I don't know whether it really was, but they were pronouncing it. Republican officials pronouncing it the most secure election ever. Why they couldn't accept that? They will not take yes for an answer, like some other people that sometimes find themselves constantly in trouble. Will not take yes for an answer because they lost. Well, if it's the most secure election ever and everything was conducted fairly and we lost, that means people don't like us. We can't have that, so we reject it. And how badly are we taking it? We now need to investigate the guy who said, look, I took a look and there's no evidence of fraud. Oh, yeah? Well, I'll show you evidence of fraud. You're under arrest. Wow. White House Staff Secretary Will Scharf, I guess that's the balding guy that, I don't know, reminds me a little bit of Stephen Miller, but isn't Stephen Miller, the wicked son. You'll find out about that this weekend during your Seder. He's the balding guy that looks a little bit like a hangdog Stephen Miller, which is difficult to do because Stephen Miller is kind of a hangdog guy himself. But he's the one that you see constantly in these video clips handing him these directives and saying, this is what this is, in case you didn't know because you're an idiot and you don't know what you're signing, Mr. President. So, White House Staff Secretary Will Scharf handed Trump a series of executive orders in the Oval Office on Wednesday and offered a quick summary of each one. The central memorandum we have for you relates to Miles Taylor. You may recall that Miles Taylor served in the Department of Homeland Security during your previous administration. In his capacity with the Department of Homeland Security, he leaked classified information, Scharf alleged. Did he? Certainly wasn't convicted of it, but whatever. Adding, he wrote a book under the pseudonym Anonymous. Is that even technically correct? All right. Making outrageous claims both about your administration and about others in it. What this presidential memorandum is going to do, which isn't an executive order, is one, it's going to strip any act of clearance that he has in light of his past activities involving classified information. You can kind of distill a message out of that one. It's also going to order the Department of Justice to investigate his activities to see what else might come up in that context, given his egregious behavior during your previous administration. Why didn't you do it then? Trump was then offered he offered it himself, commentary before signing the order. And really, it's long. I don't know. I recommend you listen to it in his words because it's rambling. And I mean, I think it's even being cleaned up here by just simply quoting it in print, which reads, "And I had no idea who this guy was. I had no idea. I saw him on CNN, or one of them, I guess, CNN, a lot. He'd been on all the time saying that the president is the president." What? I had no idea. It's like, in this office, you have a lot of young people, and there I'll see him for 2 minutes. And I assume he was in the office, but I barely remember him. Trump added, and there's more now. Big block. Okay, so they give you the whole quote here. So maybe I should just play him saying it because it's, I don't know, rather than imitate the voice, sometimes it's best to hear it it's rarely better to hear his voice for any reason. But where is this one? Media item. Let me open it up. We have the technology for now. We might as well use it. Is this gonna roll just the video, or is it gonna roll me something else and maybe an ad? That's one of the problems with this thing. Taking its time to load here. Let me roll it and see what happens, and I'll turn it down if it's got an ad, and we'll maybe it'll roll right to it. But it's from Fox News, so I hope we don't get dinged too much, but it should be public. Just a second. Okay.
The memorandum we have for you relates to Miles Taylor. You may recall that Miles Taylor served.
So this is the part where Scharf is explaining everything.
In his capacity with the Department of Homeland Security.
Can I skip forward?
He's going to do.
Yeah, he's still blabbing.
Come up in that context.
All right.
I guess CNN.
Here we go.
A lot. He'd be on all the time saying that the president is the president. I had no idea. It's like, in this office you have a lot of young people, and they're here. I'll see them for 2 minutes. And
this is a theme, by the way. This is why I wanted to sort of play this rambling garbage, is he keeps returning to this. Well, you see a lot of young people. And I don't even know if he's young. But he's just going on about how many people come into the White House, and he doesn't know who any of them are, which I guess that's probably true of all presidents. But he keeps coming back to it.
He was in the office, but I barely remember him. It was somebody that went out and wrote a book and said all sorts of terrible things that were all lies. And it was like he was this gentleman or that gentleman, like I dealt with him all the time.
This is funny. So now that's interesting, right? He's pointing to the people in the office currently. And, trying to make the point that, well, Miles Taylor, he might have been in the office, but people come in here all the time. He keeps saying young people come in this office all the time, and I don't know who they are. And he's trying to pretend like he was someone important, like he's someone I would know, like this gentleman or that gentleman. In other words, by the way, these are people who are in his office every day, is it Scharf, that we don't know him by name necessarily, but like everybody now recognizes, we've seen enough of these signings. This is the weirdo bald guy that nobody knows who he is, balding guy. He's got a little bit of hair, who keeps handing him these things and making these stupid explanations of what are the things that I'm asking the president to sign. It may be lying. Maybe they say something else entirely. Who knows? Different issue. But he's there every day. And still, Trump is like, this gentleman, which is an issue in its own right. All right, let's roll some more of this babble. Why not?
I had no idea who this guy. I said, who the hell is Miles Taylor? And he made a living on going on CNN talking about the president. And I think what he did, he wrote a book, Anonymous, said all sorts of lies and bad things.
You already said that,
and
dude.
I think it's like a traitor. It's like spying. He walks into the office. He's supposed to be sitting here. A lot of people, I'll be here, and there'll be 20 people standing in the room. There'll be oftentimes young people in the office.
Young people, Grandpa, you already told this story. I'm doing it in his voice. But I mean, I know, I heard you. Young people, and you don't know who they are. I get to the point, man.
I assume he was one of them at least. But I didn't know anything about him. And
no, he's young.
He wrote a book.
He wrote a book.
Anonymous, and I always thought it was terrible. And
I know.
Now we have a
that.
chance to find out whether or not it was terrible.
It's going to take a Department of Justice investigation into whether or not his book was terrible. How do you like that? I always thought it was terrible. Now we're going to have a chance to find out whether it was terrible. Oh, my God. What a dope.
But it was a work of fiction. Got a lot of publicity, got himself a nice job with CNN or
I
one
know,
of them.
you said that already.
And I think we have to do something about it. You can't have that happen.
We got to do something about it. Presidential proclamation. Give me something to sign.
That happens to other presidents. It wouldn't be sustainable for other presidents. I seem to be able to sustain.
Because you're so strong.
But if that happened to other presidents, I mean, it's just unfair. And if it was a Democrat president, I'd say that's a terrible thing. A thing like that can happen. That's a terrible thing.
You would pay the guy to tell you that. I'll publish his book.
And it's time to find out whether or not somebody can do that. Can they write a book about very confidential meetings? And, because they happen to be one of a lot of people in a room, and they go out and write a book, and worse than that, call it anonymous, like it's a big deal. And everybody's saying, who is it, who is it, who is it? Then it was found out who he was a long time later. And he got a lot of publicity off that one. He's like a promoter.
Oh, but, no, not that.
We're going to find out whether or not somebody's allowed to do that. I think it's a very important case, and I think he's guilty of treason, if you want to know the truth. But
so how do you like that? Okay, well, it took him a long enough time to get around to it. But it was a very, very long and babbling statement. And I don't know. You'd think he'd have more concise thoughts about something like this if he's ordering, personally singling someone out for investigation by the Department of Justice. But I guess not. All right. The rest of the article here, well, I don't know. It tells you who Taylor was. Taylor served as deputy chief of staff to Trump's former DHS secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen. Remember her? And in 2018, penned an anonymous op-ed in the New York Times. And then you're instructed to watch the clip above, which we've already done. So we're caught up on that one. I don't have anything handy about Chris Krebs and what he had to say about that situation. But just generally speaking, you see you see what people are up against, and you see why they're worried and why academic lawyers elsewhere are worried about the doctrine of giving this administration deference in these cases and presuming that they're working with regularity, I guess, or under the normal circumstances. By the way, there's another, I guess I should just go grab their reporting on it from Mediaite, because I was a little bit at a loss in watching this flyby on social media last night. I didn't have documentation on it, but I saw a lot of people complaining that apparently among the many people whose investment activity has raised suspicions that they might have been involved in the insider trading that people thought they were seeing evidence of from various measures of the volume of different kinds of trades just prior to Trump's announcement that he was reducing the proposed tariff rates to something less but still higher than Smoot-Hawley or any historical tariff levels ever, that he called a pause and the media agreed to call a pause for some reason. whatever. But that among the many people who made a killing was Marjorie Taylor Greene, which shouldn't surprise anybody. But there were some wild accusations in terms of the amount of money that was made, and I don't know whether that has been substantiated, but certainly she's under suspicion. And Mediaite happened to have a story about that in their teaser bar here, so I'm going to grab it. David Gilmour wrote this, I guess in his time off from Pink Floyd. Marjorie Taylor Greene scooped up tanking stocks and made a profit after tariff pause. They should have put that in quotes, pause, according to this report. What report? Well, let's find out. Marjorie Trader Greene, as we like to call her, reportedly made a series of bold stock buys last week, right as the markets crashed under President Donald Trump's tariff threats. Greene, a vocal MAGA diehard and loudmouth, I'm sure you would agree, pounced on some of the market's worst hit companies, according to a newly filed financial disclosure seen by CBS News. I was wondering about this and the veracity of the claims being made against her because I wasn't aware of there having been a financial disclosure form filed quite so recently that would encompass this market blip, I guess, if you want to call the collapse of the Western economy blip. But I guess there was one. Among her targets, Dell, Amazon. I was wondering how badly dinged Amazon would be. Lululemon and RH, which is probably better known to you under their former full name. They went the KFC route. Restoration Hardware, RH, not RH Factor. It's not a blood chemistry thing going on here. All of which were down nearly 40% when she bought in, miraculously enough. It's unclear how much Greene spent, since the required 3-page report only offers ranges, right? They never say how much did you spend and how much did you make. They say, check here if you spent between $15,000 and $50,000. Check here if you spent between $50,000 and $1 million. You know, there's huge ranges. Anyway, unclear how much since they use these ranges, but the timing is working out so far. According to CBS News, RH, her standout winner, soared more than 30% after Trump abruptly paused most tariffs on countries outside China for 90 days on Wednesday. Didn't really pause those tariffs at all. He imposed 10% tariffs where none existed before. Why it's not being expressed that way, I do not know. That move temporarily lit a fire under the distressed and depressed markets, though the bounce was short-lived, dead cat bounce, as other people have said. The S&P 500 gave back much of Wednesday's gains in Thursday's sell-off, closing down 3.5%. RH dropped more than 10% on Thursday, but remained above the price Greene paid, but I'm sure she probably dumped them as fast as she could. That's why the market gave back those gains. People saw profits on paper and immediately grabbed them and said, market can go to hell. I'm taking my money. Dell, which had lost more than half its value, has rebounded 9% since Greene's purchase. Hours before easing the tariffs, Trump told his supporters on Truth Social, "This is a great time to buy. I have signed a fiduciary agreement to allow my financial advisor to control my investments," Greene said in a statement to the Associated Press when asked whether she made the stock buys herself. "All of my investments are reported with full transparency, except for the part about, who's making them and where you're getting your tips." There's no evidence that Greene traded on non-public information. We should say as much. Mediaite does, so we'll go along with them on that, which would constitute insider trading if there was such evidence. However, the timing of Trump's tariff announcement, paired with his recurring calls for supporters to buy the dip, as his kids like to say, has sparked criticism from opposition lawmakers. And I guess that's the reports we're talking about. People saying that there ought to be such an investigation. Oh, it's just a quick hit. Putting it on the record. And I guess, the ultimate takeaway from all of this, since we've been criticizing the Trump administration's use of the Justice Department, is it should be noted that there's no solid evidence that she actually engaged in any insider trading. There's just suspicions. Good reason for the suspicions, but you're going to have to go a lot further before you can say something like, oh, if you were to walk out of this office now and say, Marjorie Taylor Greene is guilty of enormous financial crimes and et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can't really say that. She'll sue you if you say that. So don't say it because it's not been proven that it's the case. Get it? All right. So moving on. Let's see. Other things that I definitely want to put on the record for you. I don't know. This is a little bit of a different issue here. Well, let's stick first with this report. I thought this was of some interest. A couple of things from our friends over at Daily Kos. Let's see, are they? Some of them are front page things, I think, but others are diaries. On the Daily Kos staff, in this case, Alex Breeden, put this one up on the front page, related to the immigration issues that we were examining when we were talking about the collapse in the courts, and the narrow save from the Supreme Court from last night. Marco Rubio, callously revokes visas for entire country over U.S. mistake, something we haven't discussed yet, but made the news a few days before, wherein Secretary of State Marco Rubio had revoked the visas of everyone in the country, and everyone currently in the United States, who is here for any reason from the country of South Sudan. And, that was kind of shocking news the other day, and the breadth of the order. And there was never any real explanation of why that was happening. But I think the word was that we had, I guess, attempted to deport someone from South Sudan, several people from South Sudan, for reasons, like that there were real reasons for it. They were individuals, not everybody from the country of South Sudan, but individuals who had, overstayed their visas or something. And that in at least one case, in shipping people back to South Sudan said, we're not accepting this deportee, much the way Venezuela has with some of the people we attempted to deport there, and they ended up in El Salvador instead. Some other times we've attempted to deport people that, again, the country won't accept them or won't accept the flight on which they've been boarded. And they've ended up in detention in Panama, right? And at times we've seen that happen. We don't know what to do with them if their country of origin won't accept them. Anyway, Rubio was so incensed by this that he said, oh, yeah, well, in that case, we're revoking the visas of everybody who's from South Sudan, whether they're here legally or not, whether we invited them here or not, whether they came here on, vacation. Are people vacationing in South Sudan in the United States? I assume somebody is able to. Anyway, we're kicking everybody out. Why? Because they screwed with us in not taking this person back. But guess what? As Alex reveals here, it's our fault. What do you know? Rubio and his lackeys announced on Saturday that they were revoking all current visas for people from South Sudan and shutting the door on future visitors after the country refused to accept a deportee from the United States. However, according to government officials from the African nation, they agreed to accept people being sent back to them who are, in fact, South Sudanese nationals. In fact, agreed to accept the one that they had, the United States had expelled, named Nimeri Garang. Okay, but instead of sending Nimeri Garang, apparently the United States sent an immigrant named Makula Kintu, who is actually a citizen of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And then in that case, quite correctly, South Sudanese said, we don't accept this person from the Congo. We'll accept anybody you send us who's South Sudanese. And Rubio, how dare you not? But he's not from here. But not even an acknowledgement of that. Just, yeah, screw you. That's it. We're at war with you, basically. So instead, we sent this other person entirely. In a letter posted to the South Sudan government's X account, they're on it, officials wrote that they went through comprehensive verification processes to confirm Kintu's identity. Even Kintu himself told officials he's not from South Sudan. He stated that he hails from the Ima tribe, EMA, of the northern Kivu province in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and added that he was brought to South Sudan. That's, I guess, how they ended up making this mistake. Against his will, the document states. Despite those claims, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau called South Sudan's reasoning for turning Kintu away legally irrelevant. Landau claims the South Sudanese embassy issued Kintu an emergency travel letter in February of 2025, which listed his nationality as South Sudanese, and they must stick by that, regardless of new information. This was enough for Rubio and his team to turn away an entire country of people who may or may not be coming to the United States to, let's say, escape politically challenging times in their homeland. South Sudan, which gained independence from Sudan in 2011, has been politically unstable and struggling to move away from military rule. In recent years, the government has been working toward establishing a stronger democracy, but in recent months, the country has been on the brink of another civil war due to clashes and political tensions between South Sudan President Salva Kiir, maybe K-I-I-R, and Vice President Riek Machar. My best attempts at pronunciation there. So that's on the background of South Sudan and its political situation. Why might people be coming here on a more permanent basis? But nobody can come because they sent us a guy and we sent him back, but he's really from the Congo, and they're like, you should send him to the Congo. Well, you said he was from South Sudan. Did we? Well, if so, it was a mistake. Can we work this out? No, nobody's allowed to come here anymore. A reasonable response. Good thing we have to defer to them in their exercise of foreign policy and diplomacy. You can see why we'd want to do that. All right. Let's see. Coming up on that next break, too. Let me add this story. Something of a break from the current theme, but I thought an interesting enough piece to park and pocket anyway. Worried artists reached out to the Kennedy Center. The new president of the Kennedy Center is Richard Grenell. You remember him from the first Trump administration? I think it was, ambassador to Germany eventually. His responses didn't help. So now he's in charge of the Kennedy Center. You remember that Trump fired everybody, fired the board of the Kennedy Center, made himself chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center. And they're remaking the lineup of entertainment there in MAGA style. Anyway, I just thought this was interesting and illustrative of to borrow a phrase from Elon Musk, and you really shouldn't, but to borrow a phrase from Elon Musk, when he talks about the woke mind virus, there's a MAGA mind virus that I think might be an issue as well. I mean, as long as we're opening the door to this possibility, I think he's wrong, and I'm right. What a surprise. Anyway, this is, Grenell was always a jackass. That's true. And he was always a MAGA idiot. That's also true. But I think this illustrates a thing that I think a lot of people are running into out there, that they are finding that their acquaintances, and in some cases, longtime friends who are Trump voters or who became Trump voters, or maybe always were, but there was just sort of this tacit agreement. I like you, you like me. We've been friends for 20, 30, 50 years. We'll agree not to talk politics with each other so we can continue our friendship. And I'm finding reports have reached me from my parents. Both of my parents, in fact, have related stories to me, and other people have related stories to me of their run-ins where eventually the agreement broke down, right? Their standard deference to their friends has lost its foundation because their friends have broken the rules, essentially. And in some cases where they're not even having necessarily a political conversation, but in which they have pronounced their preferences for, I don't know what, just sometimes it's political, sometimes it's not. And they've found that the MAGA voting friends of theirs have exploded on them and just started screaming, and then accused them of being the one that politicized the conversation. I just keep hearing this pattern come up over and over again. And I thought this actually is a pretty interesting and similar illustration of what's going on. I'll give you the setup and then we'll have to take our break, I guess. But again, this is an NPR article by Isabella Gomez Sarmiento. Worried artists reach out to Kennedy Center President Richard Grenell. His responses didn't help. You'll see why in just a moment. So since President Trump took over as chairman of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in February, artists' responses have been mixed. You've likely heard about some of this stuff. Some, including people I don't even No, but a number of them have canceled performances in protest. Others, like a comedian, W. Kamau Bell, I don't think I know, and the band Guster, is that right, decided to move forward. So there's been mixed responses. Oh, I'm late with my music, and we'll have to see whether we can fix that whole thing in post-production. All right, we're going to go out in a weird place here. But as you can tell, the important point here is some people have said, to hell with this new board, to hell with this new idea of MAGA-izing Kennedy Center. I'm just not going to perform. I don't want anything to do with it. Others have said, performance is a performance. Maybe I'll go ahead with it. Well, some people have some questions. Yasmin Williams and Kathy Fink, two musicians with deep ties to the Cultural Center, emailed the center's interim president to ask their questions. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, well, I'm late in coming back, but welcome everybody, because the music was off. But now in the podcast version of the show, everything will sound just fine. All right, well, anyway, here's the issue. We were in the middle of reading about some various artists who have decided to forego performances at the Kennedy Center. Others who have said, let's go ahead and do something, and including, I think, the band Guster that was mentioned here, with whom I have no familiarity, except that I had seen the news that they had decided to go ahead, but they also made something of a statement. While they were on stage, they basically protested the exclusion of LGBTQ community from, under the new rules of the Kennedy Center or whatever, just generally protesting the Trump administration's approach to the whole thing. Bringing some people on stage in what I assume will guarantee that they'll never return to the stage there during the Trump administration, which is fine. Anyway, there are others who are still making their decisions about what to do. And Yasmin Williams and Kathy Fink are among them, two musicians with deep ties to the Cultural Center. And they emailed the interim president, not acting, but interim president Richard Grenell directly and asked some questions. And his replies caught them off guard, which is amazing. On Wednesday, Williams wrote to what appears to be Grenell's official Kennedy Center email, and you can never tell with these guys, telling him she's performed at the center many times over the years. She says, and you'll see the response is so incongruous with the question. This is what I'm illustrating. Like, they're asking a question that could fairly be interpreted as a political question, but it's clear that she's going out of her way to try to deal with, look, this is the political reality of things, but I want to try to make a reasoned decision here. But it's immediately interpreted as a hostile act by Grenell, who responds as though it were an overtly hostile act. And that's what I think people are finding with their MAGA friends who are just losing it over nothing and then accusing you of being the one that politicizes things. So she writes, I've always had a great time playing there, and I hope to do so in the near future, she wrote. Along with performing at the center, I've also attended many wonderful shows throughout the year and plan on continuing to be a patron. Right? Okay. So clearly she's not letting the MAGA regime there get in the way of her participation in and enjoyment of the arts, so long as they are actually presented at the Kennedy Center, regardless of who's the president, either of the country or of the center itself. But she explained why many people feel concerned about cuts to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at the center, such as the dissolution of its social impact team, which focused on outreach for underserved communities. Like, let's bring in people who from underserved communities and give them tickets, I guess. Is that what this is about? Let them see artistic performances that might otherwise be beyond their reach, or they might never become aware of because we don't make outreach efforts in their community, something like that. How sinister, how awful, right? Anyway, so she's upset about that, but or she points out that some people are anyway. She explained why many people feel concerned about it, and that some blame President Trump for the changes in programming, vowing not to perform or attend functions at the Kennedy Center for the remainder of his administration. So she says, my two questions are, does the president actually care about artists canceling shows at the Kennedy Center? What, if anything, has changed about the Kennedy Center, is her second question, regarding hiring practices, performance booking, and staffing? Like, tell me what's going on? What's the deal? Within 2 hours, Grenell responded, let me ask you this question. Would you play for Republicans, or would you boycott if Republicans came to your show? Right? I mean, listen, changes have been made. I want to know what they are, what the real impact is. I hope to be able to perform there. I hope to be able to patronize the place. I have some concerns. Oh, yeah? Aren't you really saying that you refuse to perform for Republicans? Aren't you the one politicizing this? I bet you wouldn't even perform if there were Republicans in your office. Who said anything about that? And I mean, that this guy can't rise above that. I mean, I think he's ill. I really do. The email was signed Rick, R-I-C, as he likes to sign those things. That's his spelling of his name, of his nickname, I guess. NPR reviewed the emails, and they appear to be legitimate, originating from an email address that belongs to Grenell. The Kennedy Center and Grenell did not respond to NPR's multiple requests for comment. Williams told Grenell she believes Republicans have been in her audiences, of course, in the past, and does not believe in boycotting shows for this reason. All right? Pretty reasonable, right? I would perform for Republicans. I've performed for Republicans before. I continue to do so. I imagine they'll be in the audience in the near future. I don't believe in refusing to perform because you found out that people in the audience are Republicans. That's crazy. Not enough for Rick, because in further responses, Grenell said that the Kennedy Center did not cancel a single performance, and cancellations were the result of artists who did not want to perform for Republicans. That is, of course, not the reason that they gave and not the reason that they believe. It's not that they don't want to perform for Republicans, that they don't want to have anything to do with the Kennedy Center being programmed ideologically. But okay. He writes, you shouldn't believe what you read in the newspapers, who exist to hate Republicans, he wrote. Read more. Don't swallow what the media tells you. Don't be gullible. What? In a message immediately following, he wrote, your people, whatever that might mean, also booed and harassed the vice president, who simply wanted to enjoy music with his wife for a night. Who is the intolerant one, after all? Who's the intolerant one in that situation? I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't boo anybody. What the F are you talking about? He, like others, have just made themselves mentally ill over their insistence that they're defending Trump from attacks. Like, should I come and perform? I don't know what to do. What's happening over there? Does the president care if I cancel or not? Is there reason to cancel? How dare you? You are the worst. Don't be gullible. Who is the intolerant one? Williams reiterated her original questions and asked Grenell to please avoid making assumptions about her political stances, urging him to maintain a professional tone. Ready for this answer? I'm too busy to confront your vapidness, to believe what you read without doing your own research, Grenell wrote. He told her the Kennedy Center had zero in the bank, and he cut the DEI, we'll say BS, I guess here. It's just B and a bunch of asterisks. But because we can't afford to pay people for fringe and niche programming that the public won't support. What? Former Kennedy Center President Deborah Rutter declined to comment on Grenell's claims, but records published by ProPublica indicate that the center made a profit of over $6 million in the fiscal year ending in September 2023, the last year with publicly available records. The Washington Post reported that claims made by Grenell and the center's new chief financial officer, Donna Arduin, alleging that the Kennedy Center has an operating deficit of over $100 million, do not account for donations and grants that make up a significant portion of the nonprofit's revenue. People are throwing money at the place. Let's not count that. Oh, well, now we're in debt. An increasingly tense conversation is this next section here. In an interview with NPR, Williams said she initially didn't believe the responses were coming from Grenell himself. But as the conversation became increasingly tense, she decided to share screenshots on social media. Before this email exchange occurred, I didn't like how so many artists were canceling shows at the Kennedy Center because I just know so many people who work there and they need the income, she said. But after this email exchange, I can't, in good conscience, tell someone to spend their money and help this man do anything. Williams is not the only artist who took matters into her own hands. Grammy-winning musician Kathy Fink has been performing and collaborating with the Kennedy Center since the 1980s. She told NPR she'd never contacted the center's president until this year when she became increasingly worried about shakeups in leadership and programming. In March, Fink wrote Grenell a lengthy email detailing her concerns, including reports about show cancellations, and citing a quote from a Washington Post article in which Grenell reportedly expressed a commitment to diverse points of view. If, as you say, you take diversity and inclusion very seriously, then I would be very interested in hearing what actions and steps you plan to take to make sure that everyone feels welcome and that diverse artistic points of view are experienced at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Arts. Fink wrote, people are getting flowery. Okay, and I can't read it. She concluded the email offering to meet in person. Grenell responded, "Can you tell me why you believe the Washington Post? We didn't cancel a single show. You are flat wrong." Like, I read reports that shows were canceled. I didn't say who canceled them. Oh, yeah, well, the Kennedy Center has previously said that all shows that have been canceled were canceled by the artists themselves. And I understand that, and I think that they would both acknowledge that. But Grenell can't acknowledge that they'll acknowledge it. Fink reached out to Grenell again, trying to find common ground in their experiences as cancer survivors, and reiterating her hope that they could meet to discuss their points of view. Grenell did not address Fink's attempts to connect in person. Fink said she's disappointed by how Grenell responded to her and to Williams. They're anything but leadership-style correspondences, she said. The arts are what connect us. We are not connected by being divisive. We are not connected by being hateful. We are not connected by cryptic two-sentence communications. Both Williams and Fink said they want to continue performing and attending events at the Kennedy Center, but they would like it to be a place that's inclusive and welcoming to all. I just thought maybe some of you in the audience had experiences that mirrored some of this, and it might be of interest to know that it's happening everywhere to everybody. And we're all finding that there are people who, you say, I just want to know whether or not I should do this thing. It's hard to plan these days. Oh, it's hard to plan these days? Why are you such a libtard? I hate your guts. Did you read that in the Washington Post? What a moron. I just saw a clip circulating the other day. It has nothing to do with anything, I guess, that I'm talking about right now. But it seems similar just in terms of the style. I think it was from is it The Five, that show on Fox? And I guess one of the token liberals that they had on there, and I mean, I'm sorry, you're probably working your ass off to represent the correct viewpoint. to call you a token liberal, but bringing up that, the tariffs are a huge burden on the economy, and they're going to cost American families thousands and thousands of dollars. Right? Where'd you get that information? She said, like the Yale Budget Lab or something. I don't know what the institution is, but it was from Yale. And they just guffaw. They're like, you're listening to Yale. I can't believe it. Like as though the world had come to the conclusion that, well, Yale, they cheat, they lie, they're stupid. Ha ha ha. And she was just like, why are you making fun of smart people who calculate things? I think was the quote. And that's, of course, of no import to the rest of the panel. Ha ha ha, Yale. Everyone knows that. Yeah, it's just interesting and a growing phenomenon. We find this everywhere. And I don't know, just an overarching sense of despair that there are certain people you cannot have any discussions with. I found this fact. Fact? You're so dumb you believe facts. You probably read it in a newspaper. I hate your guts. They should kill you. Like, wow. All right. I guess I won't be having conversations with you about anything ever again. Okay. Let's see. Other things to put on the record, or are we shifting gears here, or what? I need to update you on yesterday's conversation. You've likely seen it in the newspaper already, but I will acknowledge yesterday, Greg and I were spending the morning talking about the roadblock that the House Republicans had hit, the so-called hardliners, sticking to their principles. And they were blocking the passage in the House of the budget resolution. And the question was, will they stick to their principles, or will Trump be able to convince them to do otherwise? Well, it was somewhere in the middle. Trump didn't do any work convincing them, but they didn't stick to their principles. By the evening, it was all over. They'd all caved, and they passed the budget resolution in the House, despite all of the objections they said they had to the spending side of the ledger. Just want to point that out. We were not sure how long that would last, not sure whether or not Trump had the leverage over those guys, I guess, in light of, we mentioned, well, now that Elon Musk had failed to throw enough money at the problem that he could change the outcome in Wisconsin's judicial election, people were less worried about being primaried by him and his money. But whether that had anything to do with it or not, they caved and jumped ship and passed the thing by one vote. So there you go. Okay, so that's on record. That has happened. They delayed the vote, but only for a couple hours, and they went ahead and passed it yesterday. So now they can all go on their 2-week recess. Isn't that great? All right. Another thing that I made passing mention of at the top of the show, the people who have multiple assignments in the administration and are secretary of one thing or another, but also acting as acting as directors, or not secretaries necessarily, but administrators of other agencies. Like for a while, and I guess is it still the case? Is Marco Rubio still acting as head of? I think they put in a different acting agency head for AID now. And they may have been through 2 or 3 of them. But one of these double assignments was actually Kash Patel, who, as you know, is supposed to be working as director of the FBI and was doubling up as director of ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau. And that has come to an end, according to the Daily Beast. Let's see. Josh Fialo is the reporter on this piece, but I think the paywall is going to come up and get in the way in a minute, but at least I got the authorship right. But I can still read you the text because reasons. Kash Patel quietly removed as acting, where are we? Acting. Yes, acting ATF director after ghosting gig. That is to say, ghosting that gig. FBI Director Kash Patel has been quietly removed as the acting director, thank you, of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Don't forget the explosives. After he stopped showing up to work there, according to a report. Don't know if anybody's angry at him about it, but it'd be interesting. I wonder if they was drawing both salaries. Anyway, Patel, who remains in his FBI role, they're not getting rid of him from that, had not been seen inside an ATF facility for weeks. And I mean, that's actually a compatible assignment. and has been replaced by the U.S. Army Secretary. They still can't get anybody else, right? They're still going to make somebody double up. The U.S. Army Secretary, Daniel Driscoll, sources told NBC News. 4 sources confirmed Patel's ouster to Reuters on Wednesday, but a reason was not given. Sources told NBC that workers at the Bureau were shocked and confused by Patel's removal. The network said an exact reason for the change is unknown. Well, I like it when it's kept brief, but I just thought I would update you on the fact that that had happened, and good. That gives us an opportunity to move on. By the way, maybe I will include in the roundup for you another lengthy Steve Vladek piece that will take us just as long to get through, but his, I suggested it be read alongside what we read here today, which was about the Abrego Garcia case, just as a reminder that there are nuances and differences between two otherwise, I think, to the lay person's eye, nearly identical looking cases. This is the JGG case, the other deportees to El Salvador, the one that resulted in the Supreme Court saying, well, you can file a habeas petition wherever you're being held, except if you can't. This is a piece he titled The Disturbing Myopia of Trump versus JGG, and probably would serve you well to read it alongside this other piece and get the nuances. All right, let's see. Other things that I need to bring to your attention, some of these, that one we began the other day. That was the MAGA Maoism one. I thought that was of interest. Another story that probably should be occupying more of our time and is not, but I'll give you the headline from it and you can see why. If you've probably seen the headline. And if you haven't read the story, I know Josh Marshall was hyping it and saying, this is important. Everybody should be reading this. And I agree. It's just hard to find space in it in the fire hose of craziness. NIH scientists have a cancer breakthrough. That's good news, right? Layoffs are delaying it, right? So all the things that you created the NIH for and are paying the NIH for is amazing. Let's fight cancer. Let's find a cure to cancer. Government, like, it should be like the Moon Project, the moon shot on cancer. A couple times we've said that ought to be the priority of NIH. Apparently they've got a breakthrough and you can't get it. And people aren't having their cancer treated with it because layoffs, because dodgy. A big step forward in cancer therapy has been slowed by layoffs and new restrictions at the National Institutes of Health, where it was developed. This is an April 6th piece in the Washington Post by Carolyn Y. Johnson. Why not Johnson, I say, but that's what it's her middle initial. You get the idea. Scientists at the National Institutes of Health demonstrated a promising step toward using a person's own immune cells to fight gastrointestinal cancers in a paper in Nature Medicine, I guess that's the journal, on Tuesday, the same day that the agency was hit with devastating layoffs that left many NIH personnel in tears. The treatment approach is still early in its development. The personalized immunotherapy regimen shrank tumors in only about a quarter of patients with colon, rectal, and other GI cancers enrolled in this clinical trial. But a researcher who was not involved in the study said the results are called the results remarkable because they highlight a path to a frustratingly elusive goal in medicine, harnessing a person's own immune defenses to target common solid tumor cancers. Apparently, something of a holy grail in cancer treatment. And they're on the path, but it can't help you because Elon Musk says, go F yourself. And by the way, I guess this too, maybe we'll use that as the segue to, where did I park this thing somewhere? I must have. Maybe this is the thing. Nope, that ain't it either. But somewhere open in here is, oh yeah, here we go. In fact, back to Daily Kos for this piece, another front page piece. Emily Singer on the Daily Kos staff. Musk admits his precious dodgy, as we like to pronounce it, won't be saving trillions after all. By the way, this happened at the wackadoodle cabinet meeting, at which it was announced ahead of time, yeah, no more Elon Musk at these stupid things. Anyway, he's not in the cabinet. But guess what? There was Elon Musk at that stupid thing. And he came to pronounce triumphantly, hey, guess what, everybody? Just as we planned, we're not going to do the thing that we planned. I thought that was of some interest. as well. Co-president, as Emily puts it, Elon Musk, dramatically scaled back the amount of, quote, savings that his so-called Department of Government Efficiency will find in the federal government, basically admitting that his effort to slash spending will fall far short of the grandiose goals he initially set at a cabinet meeting where he didn't belong on Thursday, during which Trump officials heaped disgusting amounts of praise on dear leader Donald Trump. If you get a chance to listen to any of those clips, you won't believe it. Musk said Dodgy will find just $150 billion in cuts. And now that's a lot of money, true, but I think they initially said they were going to do $2 trillion. This is 150 billion. That's like, well, if they even by a factor of 10, you'd only get to 1.5 trillion. You need to find another $500 billion. So what, like 15, factor of 15 off on that one? Is my math correct? Look, I'm not a mathematician. Thanks to your fantastic leadership, this amazing cabinet, and the very talented Dodgy team, I am excited to announce that we anticipate savings in fiscal year 26 from the reduction of waste and fraud by $150 billion, Musk said at the cabinet meeting. There's some video of him doing it. While Musk made this out to be some sort of major victory, $150 billion is a pittance compared to the $2 trillion he once promised to cut. I guess it's a good thing he can't do that. It's also going to be impossible to check Dodgy's savings math, as Musk and his minions have so far posted inaccurate data detailing what they've cut and then stopped providing data altogether on purported savings once they were called out. What's more, since Musk set out on his quest to cut the budget, federal spending actually went up. Isn't that something? With the government spending more money on social safety net programs, and that's good, I guess, as well as to finance the national debt. What we do know, however, is that Dodgy's cuts have done more to hurt than help. And of course, detailing all of that for us, we know all about the number of employees they've fired, how many times that's been found to be illegal, how many times they've defied orders to reverse them, et cetera, et cetera. But now it turns out they're not even saving nearly the money that they said they were going to, and that despite the claims that they were still saving $150 billion, for some strange reason, year over year, the spending in the months since Donald Trump has taken office has in fact increased, despite laying off everybody and freezing all the money. How odd. I don't know that I could explain it. But governance and budgeting is actually fairly tough and dense work. And if your employees are dense, it doesn't help them do the dense work. It actually makes it more difficult. Okay. Let's see. Just very few minutes left here on. I really didn't get over to something. I'll assign you this reading. I mentioned, I think earlier in the week, that there was more reporting on what a weirdo Curtis Yarvin is. Gil Duran at The Nerd Reich, which I think is one of those Substack type things, has written a piece called Curtis Yarvin Fears His Authoritarian Fantasy is Flopping. It's a April 7th piece that you might find interesting reading over the weekend. Dark Enlightenment Guru sees his desired revolution unraveling under the weight of its own stupidity. It's an attractive subheader there, and it's of some interest. Basically, he's, preparing the whole excuse, communism never failed. It was just improperly implemented, or conservatism hasn't failed. Or I didn't abandon the Republican Party, they abandoned me, or whatever it is. It's always the ideology was improperly implemented, not that it was stupid to begin with. But it's worrisome only because he's got such a dark, weird vision, and that any of it is taken seriously is seriously concerning. And if he's able to steer these wackadoodles back onto what he thinks is on track, well, it'll just get more disastrous from here on in. All right, time for us to pretty much wrap things up. But I guess I've got a few seconds to try to squeeze something in. Here's a report that, again, I'm sorry I didn't get to. It's from April 2nd in The Intercept. And again, here, probably the headline will do to illustrate the importance of the issue. But you'll have to do the reading on your own. Trump just pardoned, there's another pardon, a corporation. Question mark. Did he? Yes, he did. In what may be an American first, President Donald Trump pardoned a company sentenced to $100 million in fines for breaking money laundering laws. So he'll definitely want those laws out of the way. Matt Sledge wrote this on April 2nd, again for The Intercept. And we'll just give you a couple of seconds of the flavor of the thing. And I think there was probably also a Blue Sky post about it that caught my eye. Amid a flurry of pardons President Donald Trump issued to white-collar criminals this week, one name that has largely escaped notice did not belong to a person at all. In what may have been a first, Trump pardoned a corporation. A company that earned that distinction, or the company that earned that distinction, was a cryptocurrency exchange. Sentenced to a $100 million fine for violating an anti-money laundering law. Isn't that nice? And I guess it couldn't happen to a better / worse group of people, but it was of some interest. Where did I see this thing? Because I'm pretty sure that next to it would have been the Blue Sky post that brought it to my attention. Is this it? Might give us a quick look. Yeah, all right, I think so. No, maybe not. All right, well, that's not the one. That's a different outrage that we won't have time for, but something you can read over the weekend, as I mentioned, just trying to keep you up to date on all the craziness that we can and shoehorn a few more things in there. Time now, though, for Justice Putnam to shoehorn in his views on what's going on and happening over in the past week and into the next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, following us right here live streamed on the Netroots Radio Network. Trump is getting some bad news of insider trading scandals. Guess what? It's widening, not just murdery trader Green involved.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
He's also got his take on what happened up at, is it Pitifik Space Base in Greenland, with their commander being dismissed. And let's see, the Trump administration moved for the release of the ex-FBI informant who fabricated the bribery story about the Bidens. Wouldn't that be something? Golly, I can't believe he's doing it. We'll catch you next week.